The dish pit at Marigold's ran hottest at midnight, and that was where the old man liked it. Steam climbed off the three-bay sink and fogged the little window above it until the alley outside disappeared, and for a few hours each night he could stand in that warm gray blur and pretend he was nowhere at all. He wore a black apron gone stiff with bleach. His hands, 71 years old, were cracked across the knuckles and pink from the water, and he moved them the way a man moves who has been doing the same thing so long the work has stopped asking anything of his mind. Plates in, spray them down, rack them, send the rack through the Hobart, pull it out the far end, clean and steaming and stack it for the morning crew. He did this 400 times a night, 6 nights a week, and he never once complained, and he never once looked anyone in the eye for longer than it took to nod. His name on the schedule taped to the walk-in door read Cal Dempsey. That was not his name. Dempsey had been his wife's maiden name, before there was a wife, before any of it, and he had borrowed it the way you borrow a coat you have no intention of giving back. He had filled out the application at a folding table in the back office in March, and when the kitchen manager asked for a last name, he said Dempsey without a hitch in his voice, because he had practiced it in the truck for a week. The manager wrote it down and didn't look up. The manager had 11 open positions and a dish station that turned over every 6 weeks, and an old man who showed up sober and on time was not a problem worth examining. The woman who owned Marigold was named Camille Rourke. She was 44 years old. 2 years earlier, a food magazine had put her on its cover under the words, "The South's Most Important Chef," and she had hated the photograph and framed it anyway because her business partner said you had to. Marigold had a 6-week waiting list. It had a James Beard medal hanging crooked by the host stand because nobody could agree on where else to put it. It had a tasting menu that cost $220 before wine, and a dish, a single soft biscuit split and filled with sorghum butter and a sliver of country ham that grown men had been known to go quiet over. People flew in for that biscuit. They did not know that the recipe's in TT years old and had been written in pencil on the back of a seed catalog by a woman named Mabel who had been dead for 31 years and who had been Camille's grandmother and the old man at the dish pit's mother. He knew the biscuit before he ever saw it on a plate. He had stood in the dark of the Preet kitchen on his first night, watching the morning baker's mies laid out under plastic wrap, and he had seen the little card propped against the flour bin in a sleeve of laminate, and he had recognized his own mother's handwriting from across the room, the loop on the capital B, the way she crossed her sevens like a European even though she had never left Dorchester County. He had stood there a long time, then he had gone back to the sink, because the racks did not wash themselves, and because if he stood still much longer, somebody was going to ask him why. Camille did not know him. That was the entire architecture of the thing. She had last seen her father when she was 9 years old, in the doorway of a rented house in North Charleston, with a duffel bag over his shoulder and a look on his face. She had spent 35 years trying to forget, and never quite managing. He had left in the spring of a bad year. There had been a business that failed, a small construction outfit, 3 trucks and a crew and a name painted on the doors, and then there had been the drinking that came after the business. And then there had been a morning when he decided that the kindest thing he could do for the people in that house was to stop being one of the things they had to survive. He told himself that. He believed it for about a year. After that, he stopped being able to tell himself anything at all, and the years went the way those years go, fast and shapeless, one town and then another, until he looked up one day and he was 60 and sober and alone, and his daughter was a stranger whose face he only knew from the internet. Camille had grown up after that in a way that left a mark on everything she ever did. Her mother, Lorraine, had worked 2 jobs and sometimes 3 days at a dry cleaner, nights cleaning a bank, weekends doing hair in the kitchen for cash. They lost the rented house and moved to a smaller one and then an apartment over a tire shop where the whole place smelled of rubber and you could hear the air compressor through the floor. Camille learned to cook because somebody had to put dinner on the table when her mother got home at 9, and because the kitchen was the only room in any of those places that ever felt like it belonged to her. She learned to stretch a chicken across 4 days. She learned that a pot of beans with the right ham hock could make a tin-roofed apartment feel briefly like a home. And she learned, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that food was the one apology her mother could afford to give her and the one she could give back. She did not go to culinary school. There was no money for it, and she would not have gone if there had been, because by then she had a thing in her like a clenched fist that said she would do it her own way or not at all. She worked the line at a seafood place on the water for tips that came mostly in quarters. She burned herself so many times the inside of her right forearm looked like a road map. At 29, she bought a busted catering van off a man who was getting divorced, scrubbed the grease out of it for a month, and started selling biscuits and braised pork out of a parking lot near the medical district at 6 in the morning. The line went around the block by the second week. She slept 4 hours a night. She paid her mother's rent before she paid her own. And 11 years later there was Marigold, and the magazine cover, and the medal by the host stand, and a reservation book she could not have imagined when she was 9 years old, standing in a doorway watching a duffel bag walk away. She was not a cruel woman. That should be said plainly, because what comes next might make it easy to think otherwise. She paid her dishwashers $1 more than the law required, and her line cooks $2 more, which in the restaurant business is close to radical. She knew the names of her morning porter's kids. She had, twice, quietly covered a cook's rent during a hard stretch and told no one. She could be generous and she could be soft, in the right 10 minutes of the right day. She simply did not have many of those 10 minutes anymore, because the restaurant had grown teeth, and the teeth needed feeding, and somewhere in the climb she had become a person who walked through her own kitchen at the speed of someone late for a flight. There was an investment group out of Atlanta that wanted to build 3 more Marigolds, Nashville, Austin, a flagship in a new development in Buckhead. They had been circling for a year. The lead partner, a smooth man named Sutton who wore loafers without socks even in February, called her his unicorn and meant it as a compliment. The deal would have made Camille wealthy in a way that the restaurant alone never would, the kind of wealthy that stops being about money and starts being about exit. She had not said yes. She had not said no either, and the not saying was eating her alive, because every version of yes turned the biscuit her grandmother had penciled onto a seed catalog into a thing built in a commissary kitchen in 3 cities at once, and every version of no felt like turning down the only door out of a hallway she had been running down for 15 years without rest. She was tired in a way that sleep did not touch. She had a standing reservation with a knot between her shoulder blades. Her doctor had used the word cortisol, and she had nodded and gone back to work. She drank coffee until 2 in the afternoon and white wine after service, and she had not had a full day off. A real one, in longer than she could remember. She was, in the language of the trade, getting toward the end of her rope, and she did not know it, because people at the end of their rope rarely do. They just keep climbing. The old man saw all of it from the dish pit. You see everything from the dish pit. You are the lowest point in the room. And the lowest point in the room is where the truth runs downhill to. He watched his daughter come through the swinging door at the end of a service with her chef's coat unbuttoned and her face the color of the inside of an oyster shell. He watched her stop at the pass and taste a sauce off the back of a spoon and close her eyes for half a second. And he watched her not let herself enjoy it the way she clearly wanted to, because she had already moved on to the next thing in her head. He watched her snap at a young cook over a plate, and then, 2 minutes later, touch the boy's shoulder on her way past in a way that said she was sorry without saying it. He watched her, and he learned her the way you learn a tide, and the whole time he kept his head down and his hands in the water, because the one thing he could not afford was for her to ever really look at him. He had given himself rules. He did not speak to her unless she spoke to him first, and she almost never did. Because what does the owner of Marigold have to say to the night dishwasher? He left the kitchen by the service door before the morning crew came in, so that he was never in the building in daylight, when faces were easier to see. He kept his head shaved close to the skin, because the only photographs of him she could possibly have were of a younger man with hair, and he never, ever went near the framed seed catalog card by the flower bin when anyone else was in the room, though he had stood in front of it alone more nights than he could count, reading his dead mother's handwriting until his eyes burned. He had not come to be found. He had come to be near. There is a difference between those two things, and the difference is the whole story. The first time it almost ended was in June, 3 months in. Camille came back through the kitchen at 11 at night to grab her keys, which she had left by the speed rack, and she was moving fast, and she nearly walked into the rack of clean plates the old man was carrying to the line. They both pulled up short. For 1 second they stood a foot apart in the steam, and she looked at him, really looked, the first time she ever had, and something moved across her face that had no name yet. The way your body recognizes a smell from childhood before your mind catches up, the way a song you cannot place tightens your chest before you remember a single word of it. She frowned, just slightly. She opened her mouth. "Sorry, chef," he said, low, and stepped aside and dropped his eyes to the plates, and the moment closed like water over a stone. She got her keys. At the door she stopped to look back at him once more, at his bent back and his bald head and his cracked hands, and then somebody called her name from the front and she was gone. She thought about it in the car for about a mile. Then a text came in about a refrigeration alarm, and she forgot it entirely, the way you forget the edge of a dream by the time your feet hit the floor. The old man stood at the sink for a long time after she left. His hands had started to shake. He turned the water up as hot as it would go, and washed a rack that was already clean. There was a woman in that kitchen who saw more than she let on. Her name was Odessa Banks, and she was 58 years old, and she had been cooking and washing and prepping in Charleston kitchens since she was 19. She had spent 20 of those years on the line, and her knees had finally told her to find work that let her stand still. So now she ran the guard manger station at Marigold, and trained the dishwashers and held the back of the house together with both hands and a low voice. She had grown up the daughter of a woman who picked crab meat for a living down in McClellanville, 8 hours a day at a stainless table, and she had never once in her life had the luxury of not seeing the people other people looked through. She saw the old man on his second night. She saw it the way you see a wrong note. He held the dish sprayer like a man who had held finer tools. He stacked plates in a pattern, smallest to largest, the way somebody does who learned a system somewhere and never lost it. He flinched. Just a fraction. Every time the owner came through the door. Not the flinch of a man afraid of being yelled at, but something else, something turned inward. And he cleaned the area around the flour bin, where that little laminated recipe card sat, more carefully than any dishwasher had ever cleaned anything in that kitchen, wiping the shelf down with a corner of his apron when he thought no one was watching. Odessa watched him for 3 months and said nothing, because she had learned a long time ago that every person who ends up in a dish pit at 70 carries a story, and that the kindest thing you can do is let them carry it until they are ready to set it down. But she watched, and on a slow Tuesday in September, on the loading dock during a smoke break, she did not smoke through. She finally asked him, "You ever cook?" she said. "For real, I mean, not just clean up after." He was quiet a while. The cicadas were going in the live oak over the dumpster. "Long time ago," he said. "Different life." She nodded. "I figured. You got hands that know things." She let that sit. Then she said, gentle, the way you'd set down something breakable. "You watch the chef a certain way, like you're keeping count of something." He didn't answer. The cicadas filled up the silence. "You don't have to tell me nothing," Odessa said, and put out the cigarette she hadn't lit. "I just wanted you to know I see it, that's all. I see you." That was all she said. She did not ask again. Not that night and not any night after. But starting that week, when the old man finished his racks, he would find that Odessa had quietly stacked her own station's prep dishes neat for him instead of leaving them in a heap. And once or twice, near close, she set a plate of family meal on the steel shelf by the sink without a word, a little fried fish, a scoop of rice and gravy, and walked away before he could refuse it. It was the kind of friendship that does not need talking to start. It needs only one person willing to stand in the room and not ask why. The thing Camille did not tell anyone in those months was that she had started to lose the reason. Not the restaurant. The restaurant was fine. The restaurant was a machine that printed reputation. She had lost the reason underneath it. She would stand at the pass at the height of a Saturday, 200 covers firing, the kitchen a single roaring organism, and she would feel, in the middle of all of it, a flat gray nothing, as if she were watching her own life through the fog on the dish window. A critic from a national paper had come and gone in August, and the review had been a love letter, and she had read it once and felt nothing, and that nothing had scared her more than a bad review ever could have. Sutton called twice a week now. The deal was on the table. She kept telling herself she would decide when she had time to think. And she never had time to think, because she had built her whole life out of never sitting still, and a body that never sits still does not get quiet enough to hear what it wants. She had a voicemail on her phone she had not deleted in 3 years. It was from her mother. From a Sunday afternoon, just calling to say, "Hey baby, just calling to hear your voice, call me when you get a minute." Her mother had passed 2 years ago, in the spring, fast. A thing in the lungs that nobody caught in time. Camille had been in the middle of opening the private dining room. She had made it to the hospital. She had been there at the end, and she was grateful for that every day of her life. But she had not called her mother back the Sunday of that voicemail because she'd been slammed, because there was always next week, and there had not been very many next weeks left, and she carried that the way you carry a stone you have sewn into the lining of your own coat. She kept the voicemail because deleting it felt like a second leaving. She had not listened to it in over a year. She just liked knowing it was there. The fall came on a Thursday in late October, the night before the end, though no one knew yet that it was the night before anything. The old man was carrying a full bus tub of glassware across the kitchen when his foot found a slick of degreaser somebody had sprayed and not mopped. He went down hard. The tub went one way and he went the other, and his hip hit the quarry tile first, and then his shoulder, and then the side of his head caught the corner of the steel prep table on the way down. The glasses did not all break. 6 of them did. The sound brought the whole back of the house around in a half-second. He lay on the floor under the buzzing kitchen lights with broken glass around him and his hip on fire, and the first thing he did, before he even tried to breathe through it, was reach up and pull his apron straight, because some part of him was still trying to be small. Odessa got to him first. She crouched in the glass in her clogs and got a hand under his shoulder. "Don't you move," she said. Stay down, where's it hurt?" "I'm fine," he said. "I just slipped. Help me up." She did not help him up. She had picked too many people up off too many floors to do that. She looked at the way he was holding his side, and she looked at the gray gone into his face, and she said over her shoulder, "Get the chef, and call somebody." And then Camille was there, on her knees in the broken glass, in her whites, her hands going to his shoulder and his head, fast and certain the way her hands always were, and she said, "Sir, look at me, can you hear me?" And the old man looked up at his daughter's face 6 inches from his own for the first time in 35 years, and he did the only thing left in him to do. He turned his head away. They wanted to call an ambulance. He said no, the way a man says no who has been managing pain alone so long he no longer recognizes it as pain. Just one more thing to get through. The kitchen manager argued. Camille argued. The old man sat up against the leg of the prep table, breathing in pieces, and said he had a friend who could drive him, and that he just needed a minute, and that he was sorry about the glasses. He'd pay for the glasses. Camille told him nobody was paying for any glasses and to please, for the love of God, stop talking about the glasses. She crouched there in front of him, and she found herself, in the middle of a busy Thursday with 30 tickets hanging, unable to leave. She could not have said why. She knelt by an old dishwasher she had hired without ever meeting and could not make herself stand up. "What's your name?" she said. He looked at the floor. "Cal," he said. "Cal what?" A long pause. "Dempsey." "You got somebody we can call, Cal? Family?" And the old man went very still, and the kitchen seemed to go still with him, all that noise dropping away, and he said, "No, no family." It landed on Camille strangely. She did not know why. She had asked 100 people that question in her life, but the way he said it, "no family," with his eyes down and his hand pressed to his side, made something turn over in her chest that she did not have a name for and did not have time to examine, because Odessa was already there saying she'd drive him, and the manager was already there with the incident report, and the line was already dying behind her. She stood up. She told Odessa to take the rest of the night, She told the old man to go to a doctor, please, and he said, yes, ma'am, the way you say it when you mean no. And Odessa walked him out the service door into the October dark, one of his arms across her shoulders. And Camille watched them go and then turned back to her kitchen, because the kitchen does not stop. The kitchen never stops. The kitchen is the one thing in this world that will let you outrun your own life for exactly as long as you can stand up. Odessa drove him home. He had a one-room apartment over a laundromat off Rivers Avenue, clean and nearly empty. A single chair, a single plate, a bed made tight as a barracks bunk. On the windowsill there was one framed photograph, and while the old man was in the bathroom running cold water over a cut, Odessa looked at it because she was only human. It was a girl, maybe 8 years old, gap-toothed, holding up a pan of biscuits to the camera with both oven-mitted hands and a grin that could have powered the city. On the back, in pencil, in a man's careful block letters, it said Camille, age 8, first batch. Odessa stood there with the picture in her hands and did the arithmetic that her whole life had taught her to do quickly, and felt the bottom go out of the room. The old man came out of the bathroom and saw her holding it, and the two of them looked at each other across that bare little space, and there was no point in either of them pretending any more. You can't tell her, he said. Sit down, Odessa said. You're white as a sheet. She set the photograph back exactly where it had been, facing the bed. Sit. He sat, and in that empty room over the laundromat, with the machines rumbling faintly through the floor, the old man told a woman he had known for 3 months the thing he had not told a living soul in 35 years. He told her about the duffel bag in the doorway. He told her about the years he could not account for. He told her that he got sober at 61 in a church basement in Macon, Georgia, with 11 other men and a pot of bad coffee, and that the first thing he did when his head finally cleared was try to find his daughter, and that he found her on the cover of a magazine instead. He told her how he had driven to Charleston 3 years ago and sat in a rented car across the street from Marigold for a week, watching the line of people waiting to eat his daughter's food, watching her come out the front door at 2 in the morning, exhausted and luminous, and how he had understood, sitting there, that he could not walk up to that door. That a man does not get to vanish for 35 years and then ring the bell and ask to come in for the warm part. That he had used up the right to be her father somewhere back in those lost years, and that the kindest thing he could do, the only decent thing, the one good thing left in him, was to find a way to be near her that asked nothing of her at all. So I washed her dishes, he said. He turned his cracked hands over and looked at them. That's it. That's the whole thing. I just wanted to be in the same building. I wanted to see her be all right. She came up out of nothing because I left her in nothing. And she made all that. He tipped his head toward the window, toward the city, toward the restaurant with his mother's recipe under glass. And I just wanted to stand in the back of the room and watch her do it. I wasn't ever going to tell her. Telling her would just hand her one more thing to carry. She's carried enough of mine. Odessa sat down in the one chair. The machines hummed. After a while she said, "You're wrong about one thing." He didn't answer. "You think you'd be handing her a weight," Odessa said. "But that girl is already carrying it. She just don't know what it's the shape of. I've watched her 2 years. She walks around that kitchen looking for something she lost, and she can't even tell you what it is." She leaned forward. "You think you're sparing her. But there's a difference between sparing somebody and just deciding for them. You decided for her once already, Cal. In a doorway. You don't get to do it twice." He put his face in his hands and he wept, the way a man weeps who has not let himself in decades, silent and shaking, and Odessa let him. She did not reach for him. She just sat in the room and was in it, which is sometimes the most a person can do for another, and the most that is needed. She kept her promise. She told Camille nothing. But 2 days later, on a slow Saturday afternoon before service, while the kitchen was empty, and Camille was alone in the office going over the Atlanta paperwork she could not make herself sign, Odessa walked in and set something on the desk and walked back out without a word. It was the photograph, the little girl, age 8, holding up her first batch of biscuits. Camille picked it up, For a second her mind refused it, the way your eyes refuse a face you know in a place you don't expect. Then it came on all at once. The pan. The oven mitts that were her mother's, too big, slipping off her wrists. The grin. She knew the picture. She had a copy of it, a curling print in a shoebox in her bedroom closet, one of the only photographs that had survived all the moves. But hers was creased white down the middle. This one was clean and whole and framed. She turned it over. Cammy, age 8, first batch. And under the picture, in the corner of the frame, somebody had tucked a second slip of paper, soft and water-stained. And she pulled it out with 2 fingers. And it was an index card. Old, the ink gone brown. And on it in pencil was a recipe for biscuits. 2 cups flour, lard the size of an egg, buttermilk till it comes. In a hand she had memorized before she could read, the loop on the B, the 7s crossed like a European. Her grandmother's hand. Her grandmother had died when Camille was 13 and left her almost nothing in this world but a way to make bread rise. The original, the one she'd thought was lost in the move out of the tire shop apartment 25 years ago. The one she'd had to reconstruct from memory and had been faking, more or less, every single day at the pass for the price of a luxury car a month. She had not known that her father took it with him when he left. Camille sat very still. The handwriting on the back of the photograph, Cammy, age 8, first batch, was not her grandmother's and not her mother's. It was square and careful and a little crabbed, a man's print, the print of someone who had labored over every letter. She had seen that handwriting one other time in her life, on the schedule taped to the walk-in door, where the night dishwasher signed his initials when he clocked out. CD, careful. Crabbed. The loop closed the same exact way. She put the photograph down on the desk. She put both hands flat on either side of it, and she made a sound she had not made in front of another person since the spring her mother died, a single broken intake of breath, and then she was up out of the chair and moving, through the empty dining room, past the metal hanging crooked, past the host stand, out the front door of her own restaurant into the white October light, and she stood on the sidewalk of King Street with the photograph in her hand and no idea where she was going, because the man she needed was not there. He did not work days. He came in at 10 at night, through a door she had never used, at an hour she had never been present for. She went back inside and found Odessa stoning her knives at guard manger, calm as Sunday. "Where does he live?" Camille said. Odessa did not pretend not to understand. She set down the knife. "Over the laundromat on Rivers," she said. "Past the Circle K." She paused. "He didn't want you to know. I want you to hear me say that. He'd have washed your dishes till he died and never said a word. The not telling. That was the only thing he had left to give you that didn't cost you anything. You understand me? Whatever you decide to feel about him, you remember that part. He came to give, not to take." Camille drove to Rivers Avenue with the photograph on the passenger seat. It was 20 minutes north, out of the part of Charleston that had glass towers and rooftop bars, and into the part that looked the way the whole city used to look, the way the streets of her childhood had looked. Low buildings and hand-painted signs and porches, with people sitting on them in the long gold afternoon. She found the laundromat. She found the stairs on the side of the building, metal, painted gray, and she went up them slow, with her grandmother's recipe and her own 8-year-old face held against her chest, and at the top there was a door, and she knocked on it before she could lose her nerve. Footsteps inside. Slow. The careful pace of a body that has started negotiating with itself over every movement. The lock turned. The door opened. The old man stood in the doorway in an undershirt, a bruise gone yellow-green across the side of his jaw from the fall, his bald head and his cracked hands and his eyes. And it was the eyes that did it, finally, because she had been looking at those eyes for 3 months across a steam-fogged kitchen, and had never once let herself see them, and now she could not see anything else. They were her eyes. They had always been her eyes. She had been looking at her own eyes in the mirror, her whole life wondering where she got them. Neither of them spoke. Behind him she could see the bare little room, the single chair, the made bed, the empty windowsill where the photograph had stood for 3 years spacing him while he slept. "You took the recipe," she said. It was not what she meant to say. It was just the first true thing that came up. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice broke on it. "I'm sorry, Cammy. I was gonna mail it to you. I had it 25 years and I never could figure out how to mail it without." He stopped. "I'm sorry. About the recipe. About—" His hand came up and gestured at the air between them, at the 35 years standing in it, and could not finish. And Camille, who had built an empire out of never sitting still, who had run down a hallway for 15 years afraid to stop, who had a voicemail she could not delete and a stone sewn into the lining of her coat, looked at her father standing in another doorway, an old man this time, on the wrong side of it, washed up over a laundromat with one chair and her face on his windowsill, and she felt the gray fog she had been living inside for 2 years finally lift. And what was under it was not the anger she had rehearsed her whole life. It was just grief, plain and enormous and clean. "You were in my kitchen," she said, "for 3 months. You washed my dishes." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" Her voice failed. She tried again. "You could have told me who you were, any night, any one of them." "No," he said very quietly. "I couldn't. You don't get to leave a kid in a doorway and then come back and ask her to make room for you. That's not—" He shook his head. "I wasn't there to make you carry me, baby. I was just there to watch you be all right. I just wanted to know you were all right. And you are." He was crying now, openly, not bothering to hide it. "You are so far past all right. You made it out of everything I put you in, and you did it with your grandmother's biscuits. And I got to stand in the back of the room and watch. That was more than I had any right to. That was plenty. That was everything." Camille stepped through the doorway. She did not decide to. Her body did it. She crossed the little room, and she put her arms around her father, around the stiff knobs of his old shoulders, and he was smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she had just spent 15 years in rooms where everything was supposed to be the biggest thing in it. He stood stiff for a second. A man braced for a blow. And then he understood that no blow was coming, and he put one cracked hand on her back, and then the other. And they stood there in the rumble of the machines through the floor while the afternoon light came in the one window and lay across the bed. After a while she pulled back and held him at arm's length and looked at the bruise on his jaw. "You're done washing dishes," she said. "Cammy, you're done." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, the same gesture her mother used to make, and he saw it, and his face came apart again. "You don't have to come live with me. You don't have to do anything you don't want, but you are done washing dishes in my building at midnight so you can watch me through the steam. We're past that." She looked down at the recipe card in her hand, soft and brown and 80 years old. "I've been faking this for 25 years, she said. "I want you to teach me how she really did it, Grandma. I want to learn it right. From somebody who was there." The old man looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he nodded, once, the way his own mother used to nod, and he said the only thing he could get out, which was her name. She did not sign the Atlanta deal. She called Sutton on a Tuesday and told him no. And she felt, hanging up the phone, the strangest thing. Lighter, as if she had set down something she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped knowing it had weight. One marigold. One room. One biscuit, made right. Her father did not move into a penthouse because she did not have one. He kept the apartment over the laundromat for a while, out of some stubbornness she recognized as her own, and then one winter he let her move him into the little carriage house behind her place on a quiet street where the live oaks met over the road, and most mornings she would find him already up, already in the kitchen, a pot of coffee made, teaching her things with his cracked hands that no culinary school in the country could have taught her. The way his mother tested the lard with 2 fingers, the way she knew the buttermilk was right by sound. The small mercies of an old recipe that had survived because somebody refused to let it die. She promoted Odessa Banks to chef de cuisine that same winter, with a raise that made Odessa cry at the pass in front of the whole line, which she never let anyone forget. Odessa never told Camille that she was the one who put the photograph on the desk. Some things don't need the credit. They just need to have been done. And Camille started something she called the Lorraine Fund. After her mother, money set aside to put real health insurance on the people who wash the dishes and pick the crab and stand at the sinks of the restaurants where the rest of us go to feel taken care of. There are more than 1.5 million dishwashers and kitchen porters in this country. Most of them make less than $15 an hour. Most of them have no health insurance and no pension, and no name that the people eating 40 feet away will ever learn. They come in after the front door is locked, and they leave before it opens, and the kitchen is always clean in the morning, and that is all most people ever need to know. Her father had been one of them for 3 months, on purpose, at 71, with a daughter who owned the building. He had not needed the $11 an hour. He had a roof and a tight-made bed and just enough. He had needed something the $11 could not buy, and the dish pit could. To be near her, in the only way he believed he had the right to be, which was the lowest place in the room, with his head down and his hands in the water, watching the kid he left in a doorway grow into the woman she became without him. When you spend your nights at the bottom of a room, you see the whole of it. You see who is kind when no one is keeping score, and who is cruel when they think the help can't hear. You see the truth, because the truth runs downhill, and the dish pit is where it pools. The old man had seen all of it, and the one thing he had not let himself believe, in 3 years of watching from across the street and 3 months of watching through the steam, was the thing his daughter said to him that first night in the carriage house, when he tried one more time to apologize for the duffel bag and the lost years and the long silence, and she stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You came back," she said. "It took you 35 years and you came in through the wrong door, but you came back. Most people who leave a doorway just keep walking. You turned around." She squeezed his arm. "Eat. The biscuits are getting cold." So here is the question, friend, before you go back to whatever room you're sitting in tonight. Somewhere out there is a person who left you, or a person you left, and the silence between you has gone on so long, it started to feel like the natural shape of things. It isn't. Silence is just a habit, and a habit is just a thing a person stops noticing. The man in this story washed 1,000 dishes to stand near a daughter he was too ashamed to face, and she walked past her own father for 3 months because she had trained herself never to look down. The distance between them was never 35 years and 20 miles of highway. It was just nobody turning around. So before you close this and let the night take you, ask yourself who you stopped calling and why, and whether the reason still holds. And then do the brave, simple, unglamorous thing, the only thing that was ever going to matter. Turn around, look closer. The person you've been missing might be standing at the bottom of the room, with their head down and their hands full, hoping only to be near you, waiting all this time for you to finally see. I keep coming back to why Cal Dempsey chose the dish pit. Of all the corners a man might pick to slip back into his daughter's life, he chose the lowest one in the building, the hottest, the wettest, the one no one ever looks at twice. For a long time I read that as a man hiding. The more I sit with it, the more I think it was the most honest thing he had left in him. He had decided, somewhere in those lost years, that he no longer had the right to be Camille's father out loud, and so he found a way to be her father in silence, at midnight, with his head down and his hands full. He came to give and not to take. There is a kind of decency that never gets a witness, that asks for nothing and waits in the steam, and I think that is the quiet thing that finally earned him a way back to her table. But decency alone would have left them strangers forever. He'd have washed her plates until his body quit and never said a word, and she'd have walked past her own father every night of her life. What broke the silence was Odessa Banks, a woman who had spent her whole life refusing to look through people, who saw the wrong note in how he held a tool and the count he was keeping with his eyes, and who understood the hardest truth in the whole story, that there is a difference between sparing someone a wait and simply deciding for them. She didn't lecture, and she didn't gossip. She set one photograph on a desk and let the truth find the person it belonged to. Clear sight, used gently, did what 35 years of good intentions never could. And none of it would have mattered if Camille hadn't been the kind of person who got back up. She came up out of nothing. A tire shop apartment, a busted catering van, 4 hours of sleep a night for a decade, Because she refused to stop climbing. That same stubbornness almost cost her everything. Because a woman who never sits still never gets quiet enough to see who's standing in the back of her own kitchen. The grit that built Marigold was the same grit that nearly let her miss her father in the steam. What saved them both was the moment she finally stopped running, turned around, and let herself look down. I think that's the whole lesson, if there is one. Do the right thing even when no one will ever clap. See people clearly, especially the ones the room is built to ignore. And keep showing up, to the work, to the people, to the apology you owe, long after it stops being easy. Cow washed 1,000 dishes. Camille turned around. Lorraine's name went on a fund that finally seized the invisible. None of that was luck. It was character, finishing the sentence that all those silent years had started.